Marriage is oftentimes very exciting at first, but then life happens, and after a while, the inevitable challenges begin, especially when it comes to marriage. So, how do we ensure that you have a nice, healthy, long standing marriage? We're going to get some helpful advice today from Dr. Gary Lovejoy. He's been a psychologist and a professional counselor for over 30 years, and he's the author of the book, Marriages in the Bible. What do they tell us? He joins us now from beautiful Bend, Oregon. Dr. Lovejoy, welcome to BC. And by the way, what a cool name for a counselor, Dr. Lovejoy. That is
Yes, well,
awesome.
thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me on your show.
Now, you say that marriage is a complex union. I've been married myself for 34 years now, and I've got my stories, but can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's a confluence of different variables acting at the same time. People have two sets of expectations, two sets of problem-solving techniques, and what they've learned in their families, and so the way they arrive at solutions. They have different personalities. And so their histories are very different, and they come in with it with sometimes very different expectations, and um, and so that sets the stage for conflicts unless they understand each other and really know. And this is one of the reasons why it's important to have fairly lengthy periods of dating for getting to really know the other person. The so-called whirlwind relationships don't usually last, and for that reason, because many of them have expectations and that are not met once they are married, and they don't have the time to explore what they are before.
Now, people often say that love is all you need in marriage. I think there was a song as well that says, love is all you need. But you say, you know what? Love may not is enough to maybe marry someone, but is it enough to keep the marriage together, especially for a long period of time?
And the answer to that is actually no, because unlike God's love, our love is not indestructible. It can die, and oftentimes because of conflicts for women, for example, the most common complaints are that they feel neglected and alone. In fact, they often get married because one of the reasons they're getting married is because they don't want to be lonely. They don't want to be. They want to have companionship. And when they get married, sometimes that doesn't happen, and that's one of their most common complaints. That and over controlling husbands. Um, Husbands, on the other hand, find that they don't get respect, and that's partly because the woman is upset. She's angry that she's feeling lonely. In fact, some of them are excruciatingly lonely, and uh, and so they begin to criticize their husbands as an expression of their anger. And this, of course, then he feels like, well, I never do anything right, and so it goes right to the heart of his sense of adequacy, and that's threatening to him. And so they begin to have increasing friction, and what started out as a loving relationship then begins to die on the vine because it's simply not watered and prepared and sustained during that period of time because they are too upset with each other. And very oftentimes I find that one of the most common issues underlying both is low self-esteem. And when they do, they don't. When they have low self-esteem, they are more likely to interpret each other's remarks as condescending, upsetting, and they will undercut each other and so forth. They're more likely to respond out of spite than they are to respond in terms of what can we do to make it better. And so they don't frame it in positive terms; they frame it in the negative terms that they feel.
Now, Abraham is considered many times to be the father of faith, but he wasn't exactly the poster boy for the best marriage of all time. So, what do you cite as Abraham's greatest weakness within his marriage?
But his greatest weakness was really, ironically, the lack of assertiveness, because and he had tremendous faith, and he believed in God, and believed God so firmly that he took off to a foreign country to which he was unfamiliar, didn't know if he could survive in that country, and yet he went willingly. But when it came to domestic affairs, it was an entirely different matter. As you know, not once but twice, he pawned his wife off as his sister. And um, and why did he do that? Because he was in a foreign country. He was afraid he might apparently his wife was good looking and afraid that people would either would kill him or somehow deal harshly with him, and so he pretended that she was his sister. And I've often said to couples, I said, you can imagine if you're going walking down the street and some dicey character's walking towards you and your husband pushes you in front of you and say, here, take her, don't take me. I hardly know this woman. I don't think your wife would be too impressed. And we don't really know how Sarah felt at that moment because it's not described. But later it is, because when she is barren and deeply depressed over that, and so she gives him Hagar, and he has Ishmael with him, and Hagar is constantly putting her down, constantly mocking her, and it's happening right in his own under his own nose in his own tent, and he said nothing. And finally, you find one of the angriest exchanges in the Bible when Sarah confronts Abraham and says, do something. I'm suffering here, and you're not doing a thing. Do something. And of course, he did the classic thing. He said, he basically washed his hands and said, well, you take care of it yourself. You're free to do whatever you want with her. Well, she was angry with her, so she dealt harshly with her, and then so much so that Hagar ran away, and then Abraham had to go and fetch her. But all that was because he was unwilling to deal with the situation. He didn't want to deal with it. And so when it came to domestic matters, he was very passive, and his passivity led to, I think, a lot of unhappiness in his relationship. Obviously, Sarah was not happy.
Now, you suggest that transparency is the hallmark of a very healthy marriage. So we're not just asking our politicians to be more transparent, but our spouses as well?
Yes, oh, absolutely. In fact, if you're not transparent, what happens is that something may bother you, something may be upsetting you that your spouse is doing, but you say nothing. You just keep it under wraps. Well, your partner can't change anything if you don't tell them what's going on. And by the same token, you're deceiving inside, and that just goes down underground and works like a cancer against the relationship. So transparency and honesty in a relationship is absolutely imperative. And I really strongly believe that couples should periodically, if not once a week, just sit down and just talk about their relationship. Say, how are we doing? Is there anything that you see we need to work on together, and so forth. So that there's always an honest. We all know each other. We know where each other stands, what's happening. We know how to make changes. But you can't make change you don't know about. And so consequently, if you kept it in the dark, the relationship simply goes in a downward trajectory.
Yeah, communication is key. It's the same with my wife and I. If there's anything bothering us, let's talk it through. Let's talk about it. If anything whatsoever is bothering, communication.
Absolutely.
Now, you're right that couples need to periodically assess the state of their marriage. So how do we go about doing that?
Well, to assess the state of your marriage is to really just sit down, talk to each other, and say, are there any things that are going on that are bothering you that you haven't shared with me? Something that maybe we can work on together. The actual invitation to do that by the husband, particularly, the actual invitation to do that is an invitation for intimacy. Because what it does is it says, I want to know you well. I want to know you even better. I want to know all the things that are going on with you. And if there's anything I can do that makes your life better, I want to do that. That's an expression of love and an invitation to intimacy. And when you do that, it automatically has a positive impact on your spouse. Because you can't help but think, gosh, they took the risk of being honest with me about something that was maybe bothering them, and that's intimacy. But most people think of intimacy as being very close and kissing and touching and so on. And that's true, that's intimacy, but most people don't think about actually talking about difficult issues as part of intimacy. And it's because it's being honest about the whole person, not just putting on a show for the sake of tranquility, but rather being honest so that something can be done about it.
So, Dr. Lovejoy, is it really dangerous putting together a list on a piece of paper, writing down maybe things you want your spouse to work on to really help to contribute to a healthier marriage? Like she'll be writing down snoring for him, he's writing down bad cooking for her. I mean, that's probably not that productive or, that
No,
beneficial.
actually, when you're asking for a change, what you're doing when you're being honest like that, you're not asking how can you change, you say how can I change. In other words, I'm asking what am I doing that might be bothersome to you, might anger you, might feel I'm putting you down. I may be doing things that I'm not even aware of that are detrimental to the relationship. And so you're letting me know some things that are bothering you, but I'm really asking about me, not about you. And that tends to trigger, though, mutual honesty, so that my spouse will, in turn, ask, "Is there anything I'm doing that I can change?" So we're asking how each other can change, not from the other person, but to ourselves. And that's what involves humility. And I think humility and self-esteem are intricately related. One cannot occur without the other. You cannot have humility if you have low self-esteem, and you cannot have high self-esteem if you don't have humility. So the two are interrelated in such a way that you see this in this mutuality of connection about how to make change in our relationship.
Sometimes marriages fall into a simple routine. So how can we really avoid that and make things spicy and fresh and new once again?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things sometimes have clients do is I'll say to them in a given situation, "What do you usually do?" And they'll describe to me what they usually do in the situation. And what I tell them is, "So then do something different." And they'll say, "What?" I said, "It doesn't matter. Just something different." Because if you do something different, then you're going to elicit a different response. And if you want to see change in a relationship, you make the change first and watch the change take place in your spouse, because your spouse has to adapt to the change. I don't know if you have the time, but I have a perfect example of that, of a couple that came in to see me. I don't know if I have the time to share this or not. Woman came in, her relationship was falling apart. They were screaming at each other, yelling every single night for 5 years. I don't even know how they managed to last that long. And I said, "Well, does he know what you're going to say when you respond to him?" Because he always come home and he was in usually a dark mood, and so he would take her on and start criticizing her or yelling at her, and she would then respond. She said, I'm no wallflower. I will come back and fight myself." And so they'd have these knockdown, drag out battles. And I said, "Well, I said, do something different." And I said, "Well, what do they do different?" I said, "Well, when you go home, pick up a water pistol and fill it with water and put it in your purse. And the next time he comes home and he starts in on you, instead of yelling back at him, reach in, pull out your squirt gun and squirt him, and right between the eyes, and then run out of the room giggling." And I said, "Do you think that would be different?" And she said, "Oh, it would really be different." So she said, I'll try that." And so she left, and 2 weeks later, she came back, and she was radiant. And I said, "What happened?" And she says, "Well," she said, I did what you said, and the first time he did, I shot him between the eyes, and I ran out." He said, "The only thing I did is I had to look over my shoulder to see how he was responding, and he was standing there dumbfounded, water dripping off his nose, saying, 'What was that all about?' But it ended the argument," she said, "and that was successful." So she did it a second time. So the next night it happened again. So she did it again. Third night she did it. She pulled out her pistol and aimed it at him, and then she was looking down the barrel of his water pistol. He got, and they had an old-fashioned water gun fight, which they ran through the house and ended up being soaked in the skin and fell on the floor laughing for the first time. And they suddenly looked at each other. This is the first time we've laughed with each other in over 5 years.
Good thing he used a water pistol and not raw eggs.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
divorce is a very tough thing all around, especially when it comes to kids when you get younger children. Is there a way we can actually divorce-proof our marriage?
Yeah. Some of the things we're talking about demonstrating not only transparency and honesty to each other, but be a willingness to forgive one another and to have empathy for what the other person. is feeling, because oftentimes we only look at it from our perspective. And so it's important that that we see it from their perspective and feed that back to them so that they know that I understand, or you understand what your spouse is saying. And that in itself is reinforcing. And then and with the mercy and the forgiveness that is a part of that, and framing your request for change in positive terms, not negative. Like, I don't like you doing this, do this instead. Instead of that, saying, when you do this, it really makes a difference for me. Notice the difference between the two. I'm framing it in positive, proactive terms as opposed to antagonistic, negative terms, which then the other person gets defensive, doesn't really hear what you have to say, and pretty soon it evolves into a fight. And so you make those kinds of interactions which are much more fruitful and much less antagonistic. And each time you do those kinds of things, what you're really doing is you're basically saying, you are valuable to me. You have great worth to me. I love you deeply. And therefore, I want to see our relationship at its best. And that attitude is what comes across. If an attitude comes across as, you bug me, you're always doing something wrong, you never make me happy, you're always on me. If that's the message that comes across, you're going to get resistance. Because the other person is going to then be defensive, and they're going to fight back. And then you say, well, here, I brought it up, and then you just yell at me. What good does that do? And so they feel self-righteous. They feel like, well, I tried and didn't work, so forget it. And instead, if you're approaching it from the perspective we're talking about, and really asking, how might I change to make life better for you?
Dr. Gary Lovejoy is a counselor and author of Marriages in the Bible. What do they tell us? Thanks so much for joining us today from Bend, Oregon.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks so much for watching.